Morning. Morning, everybody.
Morning, Rabbi.
Morning.
Morning. Welcome.
Is Ann Seville back, Mel? Ann Seville.
And so she's there.
Hey. Morning.
Ann, are you back or are you still in Florida?
Logan and just when they inherited it, Paris.
Jackie, thank you very much. Art Del Puerto, National Border Patrol Council Vice President, in focus now. Art, first of all, look, it turned political pretty quickly when the Democrats didn't show up.
Bruchim habayim, everybody. Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes. Morning.
Okay, that's good.
Well, look,
You can hear me.
some time, but that's because you have.
Good morning.
Cares about your.
Okay. So, give me a moment. I'm just gonna organize a thing or two, and then we'll get started. Okay, just another moment, get started, starting a beautiful class. Until now, we did the 6 days of creation. Today, we're gonna focus on Shabbos, the 7th day of creation. So we're all very excited.
Yeah.
We're going to do the most important day. Just a second. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, so we're going to talk today about the 7th day of creation, which is the final day of creation. We need to understand a little bit about it. Says Hashem worked for 6 days, and the 7th day he rested. So everyone asks the question, what does it mean God rested? Does God exert himself when he works? Does he work hard? Like for 6 days he worked, 7th day he rested. And that's why we today also keep the Sabbath. We work for 6 days, and on the 7th day we rest. So it's assuming that Hashem worked for 6 days. Did he really work? I mean, perhaps, he did things which were hard things for us, but for him, God can do everything. He's the omnipotent God, the omnipotent God, the all-powerful. He can do everything. So for him, just to create a world is like for us to breathe, And it's interesting. On Shabbos, how do we celebrate Shabbos? We cease from work. But is that actually the case? Many people ask me the question, Rabbi, on Shabbos, we're resting from work because Hashem worked for 6 days, and the 7th day he rested. So why is it on Shabbos we're not allowed to flick on a light switch, turn on a motor, or whatever it is, right? Where's the work there? It's the easiest thing, On Shabbos, you're allowed to move your couch in the house from one corner, from one room to the other, heavy couch, heavy bed. You're allowed to move it. Schwitzing. But you can't turn on a light switch on Shabbos. What's the logic in that? And even though the Torah says you shall not light a fire on the Sabbath, it says it clearly in the Bible. One of the few prohibitions on Shabbos that it says clearly, it says don't do no work. And this week's parsha says, you shall not light a fire in all of your dwelling places. But bear in mind, in the olden days, to light a fire was a big job. You had to find two big rocks and, flintstone, and you had to chop wood and prepare the fire. Today, there's no big deal in doing that. And the same thing is also driving a car. What could be wrong with driving a car? Is easy. It's easier than walking. So if the goal is to celebrate the cessation from work, let's say don't do things which are hard on Shabbos. On Shabbos, what's forbidden? You're allowed to actually do exercise on Shabbos. Exercise is hard. People walk to shul an hour away sometimes. That's hard work. But we see that you're allowed to do that. So what is the explanation to this? What is the explanation? If we are celebrating or copying God who worked for 6 days and the seventh day he rested, it should be, so the answer is that we have to understand that, like I said before, that for God it wasn't really work. Creating a world wasn't work. What was it? It was creative activity. If you look carefully at the Torah, where it says not to work, the term that's generally used is in 10 Commandments, is le'saseh kol melacha. It's two things, avodah and melacha. Avodah is hard work. Melacha is skilled, a craft. Melacha is creative activity. So what do we rest on Shabbos from? It's not so much from hard work as much as it is from changing the state of things, creating creative activity. So the Torah says, do not do any, not avodah. Torah says, do not do melacha. Melacha is a creative activity. So if the room is dark and you're going to flick on the switch and it's going to create light, like God said, let there be light. That's the first day, right? That was the first work that God did. For God to say, make light was easy. It wasn't hard work. But changing the state of the universe from a dark world to a light world to a bright world, that is what is prohibited on Shabbos. Because that's what God did in creation. He changed the status of things. He changed the world. Okay, so now we have a new idea here of what is Shabbos. Shabbos is a time to rest from creative activity. So somebody asked me, Rabbi, if it's to rest for creative activity, so why are we allowed to study on Shabbos? Studying is also like, it's changing your mind, it's sharpening your mind, it's learning about things and revealing things. And we still look to the Torah to see what to talk about. So obviously it means changing things in the physical world. So the oral tradition tells us, when we don't know which way to go, we look to the oral tradition. The oral tradition tells us that in this week's parsha, actually, the mitzvah of keeping Shabbos is juxtaposed with the building of the temple. So we look to see in the building of the temple, what were the creative activities that were done there? And that becomes the guideline for what kind of work we must cease to engage in on Shabbos. And the oral tradition has it that there are 39 kinds of work, 39 kind of creative activity. starting from farming work like planting and plowing and reaping and so on and so forth, all the activities of farming life, and then there's baking, all the things that are done, the cooking and baking and kneading and preparing and winnowing and sewing and all these things, winnowing and sifting, all the things that are used in all the activities that are used in preparing a piece of bread, the showbread that they had in the temple. So there are 39 general kinds of creative activities in this work, one of them being writing. And I'm not going to enumerate all the 39, but whenever if you want to know clearly the laws of Shabbos, you can look at on page 73 of the Tractate of Shabbos. It enumerates all the prohibited activities on Shabbos. The key being here is that God created the world for 6 days. On the seventh day, he rested from what? Not from hard work, but from creation. So it's an important distinction that we need to understand. It's resting from creating creative activity. So when you turn on a light, it might not be actual fire, but it's completing an electrical current which causes a change in the status of the world, of the room. So that's why that's forbidden. Same thing as a car. A car also, what do you do? You're not doing much, but when you press the igniting thing, it creates a spark, which creates a combustion, which you're creating energy. So that's the prohibition. Even though today we have pure electrical cars that doesn't have a real fire. But like I explained, it's not about the fire aspect of it. It's more about the creative activity that's being employed. But then we need to ask ourselves something else, a second question here. So first, we just want to understand, what is the Shabbos all about? Shabbos, we rest like Hashem. It's a downtime. Hashem worked for 6 days, and the seventh day he rested. Some say that really Shabbos also was creative, because he created the concept of rest. It's not real creative activity, but he created rest. It says the world had everything over the 6 days of creation. One thing it was missing was rest. Now, for a lot of us, that's very, very hard. Many of us that are hard workaholics, to truly rest is hard. To say, okay, we're going to stop working. The world, when Hashem created the world, it says day and night and seasons and everything. Nothing stops in the world. Everything keeps on going and moving and moving. And he was saying, Shabbos comes, rest. So Shabbos itself was a creation. In the Kiddush, we have the first words that we say in the Kiddush about Shabbos is Vayechulu Hashemayim v'aretz, and he completed the heavens and earth on Shabbos. So what does it mean he completed the world? That means he was still working? No. It doesn't mean he completed it. He brought completion to the world. That's why we use Vayechulu. He completed it. On the seventh day, he completed the world. Not by working, not by doing creative activity, but by stopping to work, giving us the possibility of just chilling, as they call it. To be able to chill is a creation in itself. The ability to be able to not do things and just to enjoy the important things of life, enjoy our families, enjoy our spirituality, that's what Shabbos is. Shabbos, a lot of times the emphasis for Shabbos has become, over the years, unfortunately, it's become like people are like more into what can I do, what can't I do. It's missing the spirit of Shabbos. Shabbos is all about a day of self-introspection, a day of family, a day to study Torah, to learn, to not just about not doing things, but by elevating ourselves. So here we come to the second question, which I mentioned before. Second question is, did Hashem really rest on Shabbos? This is a very important question we need to ask ourselves, because what does it mean Hashem rested on Shabbos? We know that not only does Hashem create the world, but he has to maintain the world. One thing is to create the world. Second thing is to maintain the world. Hashem needs to maintain the world, the creation of the world every single day. If for one moment he stopped to create the world and maintain the world would stop existing. Besides for the fact that he has to make sure that all the planets are aligned and no meteors are hitting the wrong places. Otherwise, things will be destroyed. But besides for that, the act of creation is one that needs to be repeated every single day. As explained in the Kabbalah, since the creation of the world was created, Hashem created the world from nothing into something. He created the world from nothingness. It's called in the Greek, it's called creation ex nihilo. Ex nihilo is a creation from nothing into something. Before the world was created, there was nothing. Now, when I say nothing, I mean really nothing. When we think of nothing, generally, when we imagine nothing, we think of an empty space. Right? An empty space is also a creation. It's space. God created space itself. So when I say God created from nothing something, you get a headache just thinking about it. What does it mean, true nothingness? Nothing. Before the world created, there was nothing. Nothing means not that there's vast empty space. That itself was created by God. Now remember, space and time are all tied in one with the other. Einstein's theory of relativity and all of that, space and time are all. So when you have space, you have time, because it takes you some time to get from point A to point B. That's how we measure spaces, with time. How long it takes you to get from point A to point B. If we could be in point A and point B at the same time, then there is no space and there is no time. But I'm not going to go into this as like some kind of thing you learn probably in university, Hackenscheinig, you go in circles. But the point that I'm making is that before the world created, there was absolute nothingness. Absolute nothingness means that there's no world, no space, nothing. Not only that, there was no potential even for a world. It was totally rejected. It was just God, and outside of God there was nothing. So, what does God do? God creates a world from nothing into something. So, that is against the very nature of everything, because before that, if there could be something before that, when there was no time, there was no space, there was no world. Hashem created the world from that nothingness into something. Now, that's a very hard feat. Only Hashem could do that. He created from nothing into something. But being that the nature of nothing is to stay nothing forever, and God changed that and created it into something, God needs to constantly be recreating the world. It's like you project a movie onto the screen, right? There's nothing on the wall. There's nothingness. There's nothing on the wall. And you take a movie and you project it on the screen. The moment you shut off the projector, there's no movie. So the world is like this big movie that Hashem created. He created from nothing. He projected a world into this space. So he needs to constantly be recreating it. Think of it, let's say, like gravity. You take something, you take here. I have these scissors here, right? So I'm lifting them up, right? If I let go of it for 1 second, boom, it goes back. Because the nature of this is gravity. Everything in this world has a nature. The nature is to go down to the earth. So if I leave go, boom, it goes back down. Now, someone could say, no, once you lift it up, it should stay on its own. No, it doesn't. Because the nature of the scissors is to go down. Now, the nature of nothingness is not to exist. So when Hashem created the world from nothing into something, so he has to constantly create it and recreate it. This is the point I'm saying. It's like recreate it. It's almost like marriage, right? If one day you don't invest in your marriage, the whole marriage falls apart. Why? Because it's not a normal thing for two single people to get together. It's contrary to our natural being. So we have to constantly be investing in a marriage to make a marriage work. Otherwise, the marriage falls apart. Anything, two people trying to get along with each other, it's a hard thing. You need to invest in it. Same way as God took the world. There was nothing, and he created it into something. He constantly has to be investing and reinvesting in it. And if he stops the act of the creation, the Kabbalists say, the world will turn back to nothingness. Not just turn back to nothingness. It's like the movie. It's like you shut off the movie's projector. There's nothing. It like never existed. There's no history. There's nothing. It's gone. So every day Hashem needs to recreate the creation. In fact, we say that in the davening. It says, and every day in the davening we say, Hashem renews his creation every day. So we think that Hashem created only for 6 days. No. If Hashem stopped creating it on the 7th and the 8th and the 9th day and the next few thousand years and forever and ever, the world would cease to exist in 1 second. And it's not an act of destruction that God has to destroy the world. It's just not creating it. It will just be sucked up into nothingness again. Now, I'm telling you this because my question is, so what about Shabbos? Hashem created the world in 6 days, but remember we said he still has to maintain it. So did he go to sleep on Shabbos? Hashem goes to sleep, there's no world. He has to constantly be recreating the world. So if you recreated the world on Shabbos, so what are we saying? Hashem rested on Shabbos. He's still working. He's working, not hard, but he's creating the world, recreating it. So on the very first Shabbos, let's go to the very first Shabbos. He created the world for 6 days. What did he do? He went to sleep on Shabbos, Hashem? Obviously not. We just said before, he has to constantly be renewing the works of creation. So what is Shabbos? And how does Hashem allow himself to rest on Shabbos if he needs to recreate the world? So my answer to that is that Hashem created the world with speech. Hashem said 10 utterances. Hashem said, let there be light, let there be vegetation, let there be animals, let there be people, let there be the sun and the stars. We went through that already. Every day, he created the world with speech. Speech is the manifestation of God. It's a metaphor. We have no idea of what it really is, but it's a revelation of God. And he created the world with speech. Now, when we speak, we don't create anything. When I speak to you now, I'm not creating anything, aside for some hot air that's coming out of my mouth and some thoughts that maybe that I'm transmitting to you. But I can't create. I can't build a house with my words. Obviously, if I'm a very wealthy guy, I can hire people and tell them to do it. So then they can build it for me. But my words itself will not create. If I say, let there be a shul, there won't be a shul just by me saying, let there be a shul. Need to get some workers to work, to build. That's the way Hashem has the ability to create the world with speech. Now, why do you have to create with speech? Why didn't he create the world just with his thoughts? Wouldn't that have been enough? Why did he have to speak? So obviously, he had to, for some reason, he had to speak to create the world. That's his work. So when Hashem just thinks, it's not considered work for him. When he starts to speak, that we say is considered work. So this is what we can explain, that on Shabbos, Hashem continued to create the world, but Shabbos, the world is a different world. It's not a physical existence. The whole world is elevated to a higher level on Shabbos. And on Shabbos, Hashem recreates the world, not with words of speech, but with his thoughts. So Shabbos is, the whole world is brought up to a higher level, a higher space. Yes, Hashem has to continue to create the world, but he continues to create the world not with words of speech, but words of thought. So what is Shabbos? Shabbos is a thoughtful space. Shabbos is a place where the whole world is elevated to God's thoughts. And that's why Shabbos is a time we have to study and use our mind and thoughts, just like Hashem. Hashem didn't rest from thinking on Shabbos. He rests from speaking on Shabbos. And that maybe answers my first question. Why are we allowed to think on Shabbos? That's creative activity. No, that's not the creative thought. For God, the work was speech, not the thinking, which is the equivalent to thoughts, which is where the world goes on Shabbos. So 6 days a week, Hashem creates the world with his words. Shabbos, he recreates it with his thoughts. And this is quite a spiritual concept, that the whole world is elevated on Shabbos to the space of God's thoughts. So this is what Shabbos is. Shabbos, as we said before, is a island in time, a time for rest, a time that we elevate the entire existence, Shabbos, to a higher space. And that's the way we celebrate Shabbos, like Hashem celebrated. Like Hashem had the first Shabbos, where he continued to be creative, but on an intellectual level, on a mind level, as opposed to the work, which for Hashem was the equivalent of speech. Are you following me what I'm saying? If you are, give me a thumbs up. If not, give me a thumbs down. If you're not sure, sideways. Yeah, it's like a hard. Anybody have any questions on what I just said? Because it's a little bit of a difficult idea. Anybody? Questions? Anyone?
Trying to get it to sink in, Rabbi.
Huh?
Trying to get it to sink in.
Okay. Let it sink. Let it sink. Yeah. Okay. You can wait another 6,000 years. Then we'll figure it out.
So I'm going to have to again bother you, Rabbi. I still did not get, I looked online, I see day 6, I see day 3, but I don't see day 4 or day 5. I wondered if
I might need to do it again, but I'm going to ask the girl who works in the office to see why she didn't put it up.
Okay.
You looked at the YouTubes, right?
I looked on YouTube and I looked on your own.
Okay.
Like
Okay.
on your
We're
bulletin,
working on the 4-day week concept. 4 days you work and 3 days you rest. Okay. We'll look it up. We'll
Okay.
We'll check.
Thank you so much and be well.
Yeah, thank you so much. Now I'm not done yet with the class, but so Shabbos we imitate God, and we celebrate the creation by resting on Shabbos. Now, if you look at the Kiddush, you will see that it mentions a few things about Shabbos. One thing that it mentions is that Shabbos is a commemoration of creation, because God worked for 6 days and the 7th day he rested. That's called Zeichel Ma'aseh Bereshis, to commemorate the works of creation. But if you look a little bit further in the Kiddush, it also says Zeichel Etzias Mitzrayim, a commemoration of the Exodus from Egypt. What does Shabbos have to do with the Exodus from Egypt? It says that we celebrate Shabbos to remember the Exodus of the Jews from Egypt. In fact, if you look at the 10 Commandments, 10 Commandments appears twice in the Bible. One time in the book of Exodus, and a second time in the book of Deuteronomy, which is Moses repeating a lot of the things from the Bible again. It's like a review of the Torah. And he mentions again the 10 Commandments, but this time he changes some of the words, a few small words. One of them is the reason for Shabbos. And the first time Shabbos is mentioned, it's mentioned commemoration of the works of creation. But the second time when Moses mentions again in the book of Deuteronomy, he mentions it's to remember the Exodus from Egypt. How does it remember the exodus from Egypt? Because we were slaves and we worked like slaves, and Hashem spared us and brought us out of Egypt. So now there's nobody that tells us what to do, only Hashem does. And we're not anymore. A slave has to work 7 days a week. A free person can take a day off. So this was to commemorate our exodus from Egypt. We have Shabbos to remind us the abolishing of slavery, and that work doesn't control us. By taking off a day of work, 1 day a week, that reminds us that we're not slaves. Reminds us that some people feel like slaves. They work 7 days a week. And even those that don't work 7 days a week, some of us, a whole 7th day, we're thinking about work and about business. Our minds are totally preoccupied in that. Like I see sometimes in shul, people are talking business. They're sitting in shul, but they're sitting down and talking to the person that sits next to them. They talk about business, right? Or even if they don't talk about business, what's on their mind? They're thinking about the stocks and the bonds, and they're thinking about their investments, and they're thinking about how the money in the banks are not safe anymore. Oh, people are trying. It's like, what about interest rates? Oh, they're going through the sky, right? So people start to worry, and they get like very anxious about. So even you could be sometimes off from work, but your mind is like a lot of times we go on vacation, and all the time vacation we're worried about the business, we're worried about the work. That's not vacation. That's just you happen to be in a place of vacation, right? You happen to be taking a trip to Florida, but your mind is in Toronto. Person is where their mind is, right? So the second reason for Shabbos is to remind ourselves that Hashem brought us out of slavery. Because work can be a form of slavery. And to be a free person is to be able to take off 1 day a week and to remind ourselves that what are we? We're not slaves. We're people who choose to work, to make a living, whatever. That's not who we are. That doesn't define us. So one reason for Shabbos, to remember Hashem resting from this creation. But the other reason is to remind ourselves of the exodus from Egypt. That is a big theme in Judaism. To remember the exodus from Egypt. Remember that we were once slaves, and now we are free people. Every day, one of the brachas we make in the morning is Shelo yasani oved, that God did not make me a slave. Why is that such an important thing for us to say every day? That God did not make me a slave? Because we were once all slaves. We are slaves. So we still have some, we were slaves for 400 years. So you can have that slave mentality in your brain. That's why we need Shabbos, to remind ourselves we're not slaves. We work with our hands, but not with our minds. The word that the Torah uses for work is that your handiwork, works of your hand. But our mind has to be free. Our mind, even in the 6 days of the week, if you're not a slave to your work, your mind can be free. You work with your hands, but your brain has to be clear and free, not to be locked. That's what Shabbos teaches. Shabbos teaches us that. Freedom from work. And one day, that's why Hashem gave us. Shabbos is one of the biggest gifts Hashem gave us. Because I don't think there was a time in the history of the world that Shabbos was more significant than it is in this generation. This generation, we need Shabbos more than ever. People are enslaved to their computers, to the handheld devices. So social media, news, we're enslaved to that. So one day a week we have to like detox. Like in the olden days, Shabbos was if you smoked a cigarette on Shabbos, you wouldn't smoke. That was what Shabbos was. But today, Shabbos is much more so important. I think that they should establish Shabbos as a law in the whole world. That there should be a one day a week that people should get away from old technology. So important. And you realize after Shabbos, you go back to the technology that you didn't miss anything. You didn't miss anything out. Same ISIS, same story another day. Every day, really, you don't really need the technology. You can, it's not so important. And but we do 6 days a week. We do it. But the 7th day is a cleansing. It also proves that we're in control of ourselves, in control of our lives, in control of our destiny. We're not enslaved to the telephone, to the WhatsApp, the Facebook, whatever. So that's the 7th day, 7th day of Shabbos. So we finish now the 7 days of creation, and we will continue. I have to think what the next subject is for this Kabbalah class, but I think more or less that wrapped up 6 days of creation, Kabbalah of creation. We will announce Mitzvah Shem what the next long series is. I think we did this for about a year, maybe, something like that. So we have to get started. We're going to start the Mitzvah Shem next week, and if you have any preferences, you can text me or email me or call me. Let me know what your preferences are. But we'll continue the class next week. But this concludes Kabbalah of creation. Okay. Any questions?
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Basil. It's always a pleasure to have you. You should be well and healthy.
Thank you. Good to see you all.
Thank you, Ellen. Thank you all. Sonia. Okay.
Rabbi, very interesting. Just as a matter of interest, and I have from quite high authority that the Canadian banks are very safe. So you can sleep tonight.
Yeah, but you know what they say, America sneezes and the rest of the world catches a cold. So though we are not impervious, we're not safe from the shenanigans that go on below the border. So and I think things will be a mitzvah okay. But just let me tell you that in the history of the world, after the last major flu, which was the Spanish flu, it came a thing called the Great Depression. I'm not scaring you, but it came shortly thereafter because it created. Hopefully, we will learn our lessons from the history, and it won't be a repeat. But there is a tendency to move in that direction after these. So now we had COVID. And please God, Hashem should spare us all from any further tzaddis, and we should know from only good things and happy things, and all the Jewish people, and all the people in the world should be wealthy, reich, have a lot of money and a lot of bonds and stocks, but not to worry about it. This is the key. Not to worry about it all. Okay. Take care.
Thank you.
Have a good job.